So a couple of things I suppose to think about based on what we've been hearing this morning. There seems to be a lot of research that's telling us that young people, teenagers, are experiencing a high incidence of mental health problems and are suffering more stress. So really the question to the panel is, do you think by improving young people's relationships we can help support with the mitigation of these issues, particularly when we know about the impact of stress, anxiety and depression on your sort of mental capacity and faculties and development? So is that something you think relationships and more positive relationships could support?
Yeah, I think in terms of relationships, I think definitely it is important to try and improve sort of emotional support and whatnot. And I think that would have an impact on sort of mental health outcomes. I mean, as an example, there's a lot of work in the parenting and family literature which demonstrates that. So absolutely, I would agree. It's very important.
Anybody else?
I suppose just to say that I think within that, support for parents on how to develop those relationships are incredibly important. There's so much universal and targeted help within the early years, but at that point where those big transitions are being made at school and beyond school and what's happening in the brain and the physiology of young people, parents have to take on a different role. So sort of from looking after and always telling your child what to do. Some of the things are still the same, but some of them are different. That relationship is really different, and I think a lot of parents find that really hard to move from that kind of supportive nurture. Well, you still have to be supportive and nurturing, but it takes on a different kind of coaching, mentoring role. And I think there needs to be support and advice for parents to inform them more about that so they're ready for that.
I work in homelessness commissioning, and a lot of the young people, the trajectories can be much the same in terms of whether you're being looked after, accommodated, or you end up through the homeless route. And I agree with what you were saying about the resilience of the young people. It amazes me or how resilient some of our young people are and what they've actually been through. And the skills and the gifts that they've got are incredible. And yet, as a local authority or as practitioners, we keep raising the bar and we expect so much more from our kids that have the most horrific upbringings. That whereas with our own children, you just put it down to kind of adolescent behaviour, and yet with, for example, with Peter, some of the behaviour that he was exhibiting was just ordinary teenage behaviour, but with the slant of the kids that we looked after or through the home route, it's kind of more sinister. I think it's all very well talking about parents who are receptive to programmes of change, but kind of in my line of work, we're dealing with kids that haven't even had the luxury of a stable home.
Because one of the things is about the importance of there being a relationship or some relationships that can support, be it with a parent or a carer or with some other person, like like Michael's spoken about through his work.
I think the other thing to remember is that a lot of these things are generational. So we're working with young people whose parents had an incredibly negative experience of school, whose parents had an incredibly negative experience, and round and round we go. So is it any wonder that they don't want to engage with school at all, and actually they switch off to a lot of these things as well? I think sometimes parenting programs definitely have a place, but I think they quite often reach the people who already are good parents in that sense. Actually the parents who are the least engaged with these things are not going to get involved in those things. I was at a thing the other week with the government looking at the performance framework for education, and one of the measures of parental involvement was engagement with the school board. Well, I had good parents, but they wouldn't go a mile near the school board. So I think we really need to think about there are young people and families that are drifting further and further away from the system. And mental health, I think, is a really important point, but we always need to focus on CAMS. CAMS obviously needs some investment, it needs work, but by the point they've reached CAMS, we've pretty much already failed actually to deal with those mental health issues. So there's a lot more we could do with prevention around there, and I think probably upskilling teachers to to kind of recognise mental health issues and to really properly embed it into the curriculum for everyone, because we're all going to come across a mental health issue at some point.
I think as well another issue where potentially we need to do a bit better is in terms of parental mental health, and certainly from what I'm aware in terms of existing programs, there aren't many programs which have a component which sort of looks at the parent and tries to support the parent as well, and there's almost like an assumption made that the parent will be in a good enough place themselves to be able to offer support. We've recently finished developing a free intervention for kinship carers, and a huge component of that was what we were calling Please Look After Yourself play techniques, which was kind of about using mindfulness and whatnot, and trying to get the kinship carers to think a bit about themselves, which is a challenge because they're so used to thinking about other people, but unless you're kind of in a good enough space yourself, you're probably not going to be much use trying to help somebody else, and I think we often forget that when it comes to parenting programs and whatnot.
It's almost like we feel guilty if it's self-care, isn't it? And it's so important to continue to have the capacity to support, to take care of yourselves as professionals, as well as parents or carers working with young people. Are there any other questions?
I'm just wondering what the panel think about the current financial climate that we have at the moment and the cuts that have gone on to public sector over the last few years, public and voluntary sector, and predicted for the next few years, and just some reflections on how you're able to deal with that and the prioritisation that you're having to make as money is ever tighter. Is it forcing you to concentrate on children and adolescents that who are in the most need at the expense of what's already been described as a gradient of need right across? And have you got creative suggestions for how to address things in this current climate?
I'll take the point at the back and then I'll come to you.
It says up on the screen, talking teens, but some of us have already talked about how really the onset of puberty is becoming earlier. So we really want to be thinking about having things in place even before transitioned into secondary, more like for primary 6 and 7 in some cases, so that parents as well are sort of prepared in some way for what they're going to be facing, the challenges.
We're a small charity, and in some ways the strength of that is we can kind of move in and out of opportunities sometimes. And our kind of bread and butter is those young people at the absolute point of crisis, where essentially the next step is accommodation and residential. But we obviously know that if we'd got involved a lot earlier, we could have prevented that situation. So Peter's an example of some early intervention work we are doing with direct referrals from schools of young people who are at risk of exclusion. I think it's interesting. I suppose for us the issue with it is actually in some ways the irrationality of funding. We did a project on returning young people from high cost out of authority placements and did six to 9 months I think of intensive work and evidenced a huge cost saving on top of the far more important better outcomes for the young people. But the irrationality of it was there was then no gatekeeping to stop those young people getting back into those high cost out of authority placements to begin with. So in some ways there's less money and that creates a pressure for us, but the fundamental structures of the funding system of money being moved into early intervention, which means you have to take it from somewhere else, doesn't work. I think some of the innovative funding models, the public social partnerships, for example, which were all about evidencing cost savings, which you could then reinvest in the delivery of the service, have kind of fallen down because the restructuring of where money goes doesn't happen. So money is difficult in the justice world that we work in, for example. It's difficult for a prison to release the money that they've saved by 5 young people not ending up in it. The court system still has to function, so you can't release the money. And I think that's the point at which, if early intervention is going to work, we really have to shake the whole system and move the whole money in the structure. And that means, unfortunately, tough decisions about redundancies in the prison service, for example. And those are the frank conversations that we're not willing to have at the moment.
Anybody else want to come in on that point?
I suppose just a very brief point. I mean, I agree with what Michael said, and I'd also say that I suppose it's awful, isn't it? Because it is really the perfect storm, with families also getting their money cut, and I think we're going to hear today in the budget about just managing families, a bit of amelioration there, but actually, so many families are really struggling going into the kind of crisis that you talked about, or even starting off there. We've got more and more families with higher and higher needs, and actually less public services to deal with that. And I don't have an answer for it. I think, like Michael says, there's a whole shift needs to happen. And, you know, more priority, actually, not just priority about money from prison centres, but more priority to money going to children and families.
And the second point was about, do we need to be thinking even earlier in teens in terms of when we start to support with the transition and the changes? So
I think definitely there is an issue around definitions of adolescence, and you know when adolescence starts and when adolescence ends, and certainly in the review literature that we looked at, it was very difficult to identify like an age range or whatnot. So we used a very sort of flexible kind of age range, 8 to 25 or something like that. And I think there is a danger in putting sort of an age limit on things, because it does kind of gives you maybe a false idea that things start at say 13 and then end at 20. So I think definitely we need to keep our minds open when it comes to puberty and things like that, because it varies definitely.
thank you. Got time for one or two more?
The impact of poor attachment in early years children, and to what extent that is reversible either therapeutically or psychologically as young people grow into adulthood through adolescence, given the impact that has on the physical development of the brain.
In our review, there wasn't really anything that appeared, which is interesting. I think I think most of the work around attachment has been done in early years. But what I would say though is that I don't think it would be. I think we can obviously still support young people and whatnot, and I'm sure there are ways that we can support those young people who have had a bad childhood and whatnot. Definitely. I think that the danger is when people view early years as being the sort of the only opportunity to get it right. But what we're finding is that actually there's a huge opportunity to a huge second chance almost during adolescence. So my guess is that we would be able to, but I haven't looked exactly at the literature on that specific issue. But my guess is that we would be able to look at that.
I just wonder the extent to which we're talking about relationships, but when we talk about infancy, we do talk about attachment theory. So there's almost a scientific language around this in the early years. Yet as we talk about older children, actually we soften that and we talk about relationships. So I just wonder the extent to which you might think that helps or hinders what we're trying to achieve.
In terms of the focus on attachment during the early years, one thing I would point out is that the two neuroscientist experts who were involved in our project were kind of emphasising to us that although there is some evidence there, it's not a great deal of evidence. So I think in a way these kind of findings get taken out into popular media or into the sort of public and whatnot, and they can sometimes grow a bit of a life of their own. So what I would be tempted to do is to go and have a look at exactly those studies, how many participants they had, because what we're finding in our review is that the brain physiology studies generally have a very small number of participants. So I think I would encourage critical appraisal of any evidence, including the evidence that I've presented this morning, and certainly that would be something we'll recommend in our report. But I do think though that in terms of impact on our work, we are sort of often asked, what about attachment and what's the impact in adolescence? And because it's such a new field, relatively new field, neuroscience work in adolescence, it's very hard to tell. There's not been any studies that have looked at that as far as we're aware, what that we've identified. But yeah, I think definitely we need to be more kind of critical of any kind of neuroscience findings that are presented to us.
Thank you very much. And that probably explains why the language is a bit softer. And what you're saying is you can't yet show scientifically one way or the other the impact of early attachment at adolescence. So, thank you. Okay, I'm now going to move us on. Thank you very much for your questions and thank you for your contributions from the panel. It's time for feedback and questions now in the main group. Thank you. And so can I start with the table over here? If you just want to share with us a couple of points.
We had a mixture of things looking at the actual, going back from Naomi's point about reducing pressures and enhancing capacity. So we went from universal basic income and policy, social policy, to things such as looking at the point of really not giving up and extending that to young people need somewhere to go back to, not just support. That we're having quite a bit of discussion about how young people keep coming back to the family home. Intergenerational work, lots and lots of things about mental health of young people and developing trauma-aware schools. Anything else anyone wants to flag out?
Respect, that was one that came out, everybody got that out first.
Yeah.
Right, one of them is the increased visibility of the presence of adults, so that if you say you are going to be somewhere, you are there. And consistency, same as this stickability. If you say you're going to do something, then you have to follow that through. And you've got to develop a therapeutic relationship with the young person, otherwise it's going to be another kick in the teeth and another door slammed in the face. So we're quite keen on that. And yes. I think when it spoke a lot about parenting as well, you know, you always get the parents that you really know are going to come to parent groups, but you don't get the parents that you need to target. And it's how to get the message out there and not threaten away. You know, you certainly don't want to come across as I'm telling you you're a bad parent, or I'm coming to see your children, or any of this. It's educational work.
Yeah, some consistency with those points around consistency and the persistence of workers. So certainly recognising the importance of that. So include I've got your message across. Well done. What key things? Not being afraid to have difficult conversations. Greater opportunity to learn about brain development and the impact on that on development behaviour, so that a wider understanding within agencies, organisations and stakeholders about that whole area. Relationships with parents and carers also important to help identify what supports could help and help train them to engage with it. So yeah, those kind of areas, more there, but I'll stop there.
Okay.
Well, we spoke about it kind of starting very early in terms of emotions speak, talking about emotions, encouraging children to identify their own emotions and communicate that to others. And then from that, building on to work on empathy and recognising those emotions in other people. We spoke about, like the other tables, about mental health being a really crucial area, more education in schools, but also with parents linking up. And we spoke about being positive role models ourselves as professionals, so potentially filling in those gaps where there might not be that work at home to then be expressing our emotions with young people and having that clarity and honesty with them.
One of the ideas I think came up quite a lot with this idea of, well, we've talked a lot about the idea of potentially empowering children. I think we need to empower parents as well, because a lot of this is, you know, in order to have that kind of positive relationship, to maintain it, to help it develop, parents need to be empowered just as much as the child does, to be able to have these conversations. And although looking at young people who come from maybe kind of more troubled, disadvantaged background, we need to make sure that this conversation is inclusive and talks about all children. I think that's a very important thing as well, because these are issues that could go right across the, I think you mentioned kind of class, that a lot of these issues go across classes, not kind of class dependent. I think these are important things as well.
I suppose just to say thank you for that, because it's a huge, encompassing and growing area. I mean, it feels like early years, yes, it's so important and has had such attention. But really, you know, this is a key transition stage that absolutely needs that attention as well. And as Satvat said, we will be gathering together this information and sharing it with all of you who are here, but hopefully in some kind of briefing that goes beyond that as well and tries to inform policy and, you know, enables others to do so.
Can I just take 2 minutes to thank you to our speakers and thank you for you guys for coming along. So the Scottish Centre for Conflict Resolution is part of a homelessness prevention charity, Cyrenians, and we try and raise awareness of early intervention, conflict resolution and mediation in Scotland. So last year in Scotland, I don't know if you know, 4,500 young people presented as homeless, and that's the equivalent of 5 high schools, and that was solely because the relationship with their family just totally broke down. So that doesn't include numbers of people who were sofa surfing or didn't come to their housing office, so actually that number is quite a bit more. So we try and raise awareness of that through various mediums. We have our website, which I highly recommend you go on and have a look at, and we also do events, events like this, which are training and seminars and conferences, and we deliver these to young people, parents and carers, and the professionals who work with them. It's really great to say that all of our events are free thanks to our funding, and it means we can put on events like this with great organisations like Parenting Across Scotland. We're a tiny team and we have a national remit, so our work really is about building relationships. And that's something that I think has really came out of today. Relationships are key, and family relationships are key, and professional relationships. We're trying to change the culture of conflict in Scotland through our events. So can I just take a massive big thank you to Parenting Across Scotland and Alison, who's hiding in the back as well. Alison sits on our advisory group, and she's been with us since we were funded in 2013. And through working with organisations like Parenting Across Scotland, we've been able to deliver these types of events and put these on and have great speakers come along. So I'll not bore you anymore, but I just want to say a big massive thank you. And we've also got a little stall at the back, so I'll be there after this event. So if you've got any further questions or if you see any resources, then please come along and have a little speak with me.
Really, I'll be very brief because I'll echo a lot of what Caroline said. Thanks to Scottish Centre for Conflict Resolution, great to work with them. Thank you all for coming today, because you know you've all brought something to the event, and thanks to the speakers. In terms of Parenting Across Scotland, we're a partnership of 9 charities, relationship charities and children's charities, working together to put focus on issues that affect parents. So we work in the areas of policy, information and research, and I'd particularly like to flag up to you, as professionals and as parents in the room, our website, which is www.parentingacrossscotland.org. It's just gone through a revamp, and so you can access it now on your mobile phones. It's mobile friendly, and there's a lot of great information there for parents, and we know that a lot of professionals use it to access that information. And I'd really like to see that in terms of this seminar, we've over the years done quite a few things about teenagers, really recognise, thinking about Parent Line and other helplines. About 1/3 of their calls come from parents of teenagers. It is a difficult time. It is an issue that kind of needs to be addressed and to have more focus put on it. And I think Louise from Scottish Government was pointing out that actually 2018 is the year of the young person. So I think we really should be working together, looking at the evidence that John's brought, the great work that Includem do, and thinking about how we can extend that to mainstream practice to make young people's lives and outcomes in Scotland better. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's just to me now to close the event, and I just wanted to reflect a little bit on some of what we've heard during the course of the event, I thought Naomi made some points for us to bear in mind, particularly one of the comments that came from the floor about we need to think about this as being for all children and young people. But I thought her sort of distinction between sort of inequality and disadvantage and poverty was really useful for us in that score, because it makes us realise that disadvantage, features that can limit equality of opportunity, are things that can happen to any of us at any time. And then there's the inequality between the richest and the poorest, and there's poverty, which has income or lack of income at the heart of it. And I think that's a really important, useful way of trying to differentiate different levels of support and services we could be providing. I thought there is a need to create the evidence base for working with teenagers in the same way as we have the evidence base for working in the early years. What do we know? What do we need to know? And then, more importantly, how does that then change what we're going to be doing? I like the idea of never give up, it's never too late, and the second chance narrative from age 16 to 24, but we were talking about how you need a third chance and a fourth chance, and really there shouldn't be an end to the number of chances and opportunities that we provide. And then John, he tied in with what Naomi had said in terms of the emphasis on early years being to the detriment of adolescence, and how we need to be seeing adolescence as a unique period in its own right and an opportunity to foster positive outcomes. There's a need to support with significant life events which can happen to us all at any time. I also written down the need for sleep and the implications that has for things like the structure of the school day. And yes, there's evidence and expert advice, but I think it's important also to look at that through a critical eye. I think the point that John made about these studies that we're basing all this on lab-based with small samples and maybe looking at things in a different way to what we would be or that we have to interact in our daily lives. So we've got some evidence. Is it the right evidence? Do we need to have it more based, in life as opposed to in the lab? And then how do we coordinate and collect what we've got together to look to see how it informs our practice? Michael, I like the message that if you don't like young people, you're in the wrong place. I think that's absolutely right. And the idea of stickability and not giving up, because one of the things that we found in our experiences where young people have had difficult relationships with their main carers or parents, or have had a number of broken relationships, they expect you to leave. They don't expect you to stick around. And therefore they will test you to see if you are going to be with them for the thick and thin. So it's important to know that someone's there to support them through the highs and the lows. I thought that phrase, frozen in the moment he was in, was really, really powerful to me, the fact that Peter couldn't imagine himself in adulthood. Now that's a failure of us all, if you've got young people who actually cannot imagine themselves in adulthood. And I think for me that was a really strong point about that's what we need to avoid young people getting to. But if we can't avoid them to get into it, we need to stick with them to support them through it. And it is about recognising the stresses and the strains at this particular time. It is a massive period of change, as we hear, physiologically, emotionally, all those things. And so it's about supporting to minimise the negative impacts, especially where there might be lots of other negative factors. There could be environmental or economic factors. And we know there's a lot been written about the relationship between poor environmental and economic factors and increased levels of anxiety and depression, etc. We also need to put into the evidence we do know about and we can verify into practice. And I think one of the examples I hear about time and again is the timing of the secondary school start time. And I think I read somewhere that in Canada they're going to stop secondary school starting before 10 a.m. I thought one of Naomi's quotes, which she was talking about being about professionals and parents, could actually be about parents and teenagers, is deal with what I'm worried about as well as what you're worried about. I thought that's a little mantra I'm going to take away with me when I go back home. I've spoken about stickability and the importance. I thought John's point about how young people will listen to advice they think is expert advice and it will inform their decisions around risky behaviour I thought that was a really important point, because that is something that we can take away and start to put into practice now. And really, the last thing I want to say was I was watching a clip of Michelle Obama speaking to a group of young people who'd been through the most adverse circumstances and difficulties. And what she spoke to them about was how we turn those into a positive, how the things that you've experienced have made you stronger and have made you more resilient. And she gave the example of herself having been a dean of a college where many of the young people who came to that college had had things easy up until then. You know, they'd come from relatively stable, secure backgrounds, money wasn't an issue for them, there was tuition available if they needed it to get them the grades, etc. And she says, and when they got their first bad grade, they fell apart. They didn't know how to cope. And so I think it's about being able to work with young people to recognise their agency, the assets that they've got, but also knowing that but if it's a constant of things that are challenges for you, at some point you are going to reach a tipping point. And that's where we have to be there. And I think what I've heard most importantly is relationships and the stability of relationships, irrespective of who that's with, is going to be vital. Because at the end of the day, it's quite a scary time for them as well. I do want to focus on the positives though. It's important for us to understand the scale of change, the different ways of supporting and communicating with young people through this stage, and to carry on providing them with the support and the love and the reassurance they need. Because I think that is key, because it is their world. We don't fully understand it, but we need to help navigate them through it. Thanks a lot. Thank you.